You guys are listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast. This is the last episode of this season, which I'm excited. Am I excited? Yes, I think I'm excited. I've really enjoyed recording this season, but I've also got a ton of writing on at the moment. So I'm taking the kind of summer break that Americans seem to take, which starts in May. Because somehow most of America ends the school year in May.
And then we're back in August, and whereas in the UK it's all August, right?
Right, yeah. So I think I might just get the best of both worlds and end in May and resume in September.
That's perfect.
I'm here with my friend, Collin Hansen, who has been not only a friend, but a huge help and encouragement to me over many years. Collin, tell us about what you do as your day job, aside from being my help and encouragement and sort of functional agent and all the other things that you are.
Well, that is an important part of what I do in my day, and one of the more accomplished parts, I think, of what I get to do, to be able to help steward some of your great work, Rebecca. I mean, from conferences to curriculum to books to essays to book reviews. I was working on a book review of yours today as well. So all sorts of different wonderful things there. That is a good part of my job. So a little under the broader umbrella, then I serve as the executive director of the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics, where I work with you and 28 other fellows from around the world. And that's a lot of different stuff. Of course, we meet, we support each other in our work. We do some work together. Part of that's this Making Sense of Us curriculum that we're going to talk about there. Then more broadly, serve as editor-in-chief of the Gospel Coalition. So that means that whatever we're doing, from events to curriculum to YouTube to the podcasts to the essays and Themelios, our academic journal, and things like that, I'm overseeing that. And then as vice president of content, I'm also thinking a lot about strategy and business and how do we pay for these things, and all sorts of wonderful things there as part of the executive team at the Gospel Coalition and giving broader leadership to that organization. And I've been there since 2010, so it's been a winding journey so far. Hopefully, the Lord will allow it to continue for years to come, according to His will. But so that's the day job, which is fun. It's hard to explain. It's a lot of fun, but it's hard to explain to people. It's all digital. It's almost all remote. Though I was just talking a second ago with our friend Josh Chatreau, another one of our fellows at the Keller Center, who's next to me here on the other side of the wall at Beeson Divinity School. So I also serve as an adjunct faculty member there, and then co-chair of the advisory board here at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. So there's a little bit.
All the things. I may have told this story on this podcast before, but I'm going to tell it again. When many years ago, well, I guess not that many years ago, I was pregnant with my son Luke at the time, and he's going to turn 8 this summer. So however many years that is, 7 and a bit. I had done a little bit. I think I'd written a couple of articles for the Gospel Coalition, maybe, and somebody friended me on Facebook, who was in my mind like a random guy. And honestly, usually when random men friend me on Facebook, I just don't respond. But I thought, I'm going to click on his profile and just see, maybe this is a guy I've met at a conference or something. I don't want to, rudely not respond to a random guy I do in fact know. And so I clicked on the profile, and it was Collin's. And I thought, oh, well, this, probably isn't a random creeper, since he is an editor at the Gospel Coalition. So I accepted his friend request. And then, Collin, I think I messaged you saying, I'm kind of thinking about what I want to do with the next, few years of my life, and wondered if you'd be open to chatting. And you very graciously said, sure. So we had a conversation, and maybe 2/3 of the way through that conversation, I said, I've actually been thinking about writing a book. And you said, great, why don't you send me the proposal? So I did, and you graciously sort of picked up the proposal, took it to Crossway, with whom the Gospel Coalition had a publishing partnership, and basically took a sort of scraggly proposal from a random woman on Facebook, and helped turn it into Confronting Christianity, was the first book that I wrote, and gave so much sort of support and a help along the way, for which I'm super grateful. And it's been fun over the years to collaborate on various other projects of various kinds. Collin, we were going to chat today about, I suppose, the most recent project, which I sort of plop into as one voice among several, and you helped sort of overall mastermind. So tell our listeners, what was the concept behind the project?
Yes, this project, Making Sense of Us, a curriculum it's a book, but also videos. And it's 7 weeks, group study, Bible studies, that kind of thing. Evangelistic, but also for Christians, all that kind of stuff. So that's just the technical part of what we're actually talking about here. But more broadly, the vision goes back to the very early days of the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics. And of course, Rebecca, you remember our first retreat there in 2023. And I had known this because of the work that I was doing about Tim Keller. And I'd known some of the work that he'd done with evangelistic missions, specifically the one in Oxford. And you've done that one, haven't you? Haven't you done this one, though?
Yeah, I did. But, you know, we don't talk about Bruno.
I'm just making sure. I was like, I'm pretty sure you've done this one.
I spoke at the Cambridge mission the next year to cleanse my palate.
Cleanse your palate. That works perfect. But essentially, Tim had done this twice. And the first time he did what was the standard. It was basically an expositional talks and then with application. Nothing wrong with that. Saw a good response. Then he comes back again, tries the difference, says, what if I start with sort of the problem and then work back to the scriptures? More or less an inductive approach versus a deductive approach. And he found that all of a sudden this was able to connect with people a little bit more, especially in a post-Christendom environment where people don't have the ability to make all those different connections. You have to start further back. And that really is a reflection of what we see in his book, Making Sense of God. That's a 2016 book. And so he was exploring different ways that we could work this out in our evangelism, specifically through this concept of cultural narratives. Now, this is it's an innovation or a deviation from the older concept of worldviews. And with worldviews, you just can sort of size up, okay, everybody lives according to this perspective on the world. And then you have Marxism, or you have secular humanism, or you have Christianity. You have all these different worldviews. But the thing now is that those worldviews are much more ad hoc. They're much more, they're felt. They're not necessarily, if you ask people, they're often invisible to them. They don't necessarily, and then they also contradict with each other. But people don't seem to have noticed that problem with them. So essentially, you're seeing a couple different problems. Number one, our evangelism has to start further back to be able to help introduce some basic concepts about God. And at the same time, the way to connect to people is a little bit more confusing because, after all, it's not just like, oh, I can size you up. You're XYZ, so I apply XYZ solution to that. Okay, so instead, you have to be able to do this in a narratival way. You have to be able to enter into their stories. You need to be able to identify some of the challenges from within those same stories on their own. And then you need to be able to provide and to supply the gospel solution. So that's just a broader concept of what we're terming cultural narratives. And just, I want to talk a little bit more about how this came together. But a few of the stories that we have in this curriculum are self, that's yours, of course, Rebecca, along with happiness, science, justice, liberty, and progress, with different fellows from the Keller Center presenting on those different ideas. But one of the other things that I really wanted to do in this project was to give people visual clues. I wasn't so much interested in us just having a static lecture. I wanted this to be dynamic. And especially with the Keller Center, I thought New York City is the perfect backdrop because everywhere you look, it's a city that's telling a story. Not just one story, but a bunch of different stories. And so I thought, what would it be like if we filmed these on different locations? What if we had Sam Chan, our inexhaustible dear friend, Sam Chan from Australia, in Times Square talking about happiness? What would it be like if we had our brilliant friend Glenn Scrivener talking about progress from the United Nations headquarters there? And then, of course, and feel free to talk about this yourself more, Rebecca, this concept of self or identity. And I just thought it was brilliant the way you wove everything together through different locations in Central Park. I knew, for example, I know we're getting into some of the specifics here, but I knew, for example, that the Imagine location for John Lennon in Central Park would be important because if we're talking about stories, what story is more significant in the post-Christendom West than the story told by John Lennon in Imagine, because it's the anthem in so many of these. We want to make a moment feel solemn, or we're thinking about it eternally, and so that's the go-to secular anthem today. But it's telling a very different story from what Christianity does, and one that clearly has not delivered on its promises. But you added so many of the other flourishes, Rebecca. I didn't even think about Alice in Wonderland, for example.
Yeah, I feel like I basically cheated because I said, I'll take Central Park as my location and I will rove around and steal every, icon I can find. starting with the Alice in Wonderland sort of playground statue thing.
Yeah. What a metaphor, though, for the entire project. That's why we put it up front.
Yeah, all highly intentional.
Yeah, great when a perfect plan just comes together, right, Rebecca.
Right. Alice in Wonderland is such a bizarre and fascinating story. In fact, I recently had an argument with my son, who is nearly 8, about a poem from Alice in Wonderland, The Little Crocodile. Because he wanted Alexa to play the crocodile song. And I said, we tried Alexa play the crocodile song and it played a completely different thing. He said, no, it's not that. And it turned out he'd learnt at school a song version of How Doth the Little Crocodile Improve His Shining Tail and Pour the Waters of the Nile on Every Golden Scale, I think. How cheerfully he seems to grin and neatly spreads his claws and welcomes little fishies in with gently smiling jaws. And my son, I've probably misquoted some of that, but I was sure that it was How Doth the Little Crocodile. And my son said, no, it's How Does the Little Crocodile. And I said, no, it's How Doth the Little Crocodile. And he said, no, it's How Does the Little Crocodile. And I said, they have modernized it and made it to a song and taught it to you at school, but it is in fact a poem from Alice in Wonderland. So I feel like Lewis Carroll kind of gets his fingers into various pies, whether or not people realize it. And yeah, it's fascinating to me that the song Imagine continues to be sung, for example, at my kids' sort of public schools in Cambridge, Mass, as if it's some sort of neutral, common ground, bring everyone together kind of song, when in fact it's like fiercely offensive to people from any religious tradition. And it's making
it offends basically everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's making these wild claims about producing a utopian sort of brotherhood of man if we could only let go of religion, which certain countries have tried that and not found the utopian brotherhood that they imagined. And much of what it's promising and trying to deliver is actually a Christian understanding, but with Jesus sort of ripped out at the heart of it. So yeah, I certainly gravitate toward Imagine as a cultural narrative to interrogate, shall we say. But it's just fascinating to me how neutral it feels to people when in fact it's quite the opposite of neutral.
Why do you think that is, Rebecca? I'm going to guess it's because of how he died. And of course, the Imagine location there is right where he died. I mean, that's what the spot is commemorating there. But it's almost like that death turned him into a martyr. And somehow I think because of the way that weakness and vulnerability has been validated by Christianity in our modern era, it's almost like it's been sacralized, I think, in some sense by his death, which of course is a very Christian concept right there. I don't know. I can't figure it because the lyrics are so offensive and banal. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a piece of it. I suspect though that it's more basic than that, and it's the assumption in much of the modern West that secular is neutral. Almost by definition. Okay. That if you're
religion is the problem.
Yeah, that religion is the problem. You can either say all religions are equally valid or no religion is valid at all, and both of those are kind of neutral, inoffensive positions to hold, sort of somehow. And this strong sense people have that religion is the source of violence. Which again, for sure, there are plenty of instances in the history of the world where religion has led to violence, but there are also, the testimony of the 20th century is hardly one that you can look at and think, oh yes, it was definitely religion that caused all the violence, rather than humans caused all the violence for a variety of ideological reasons.
And that more Bible is the solution, not less Bible. Yeah, in your understanding there, then it is probably become more of an anthem since 9/11 than in the rise of the new atheists, perhaps, than it was in its original release. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, honestly, I feel like I haven't taken a sufficiently
I haven't either.
Careful historical look to know, but it's fascinating to me how much it continues to come up as the sort of go-to anthem for our day.
Think about this. If there are two anthems that you want to play on a solemn occasion, especially the one that involves life and death, the two you would go to across much of the West would either be Imagine or Amazing Grace, still, which are completely opposite songs, but you could have the exact same people love both and find both of them to be perfectly suitable for the occasion. Is that not an illustration of what we're trying to get at here with making sense of
That's interesting. I don't know that in the UK that Amazing Grace would be a go-to, or in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I am. I wonder if that's more sort of majority America.
No, it still is, because it's the go-to anthem for like a lot of Irishmen of Irish extract who are police officers or firefighters. That would be in Boston. That would be in New York. Yes, it's going to be a different class or whatnot, but of course that's another irony that it would be a lot of Catholic type settings there. But still, even in secular parts of the United States, if you're going to have a parade of, a commemoration parade, a funeral parade for a fallen officer, it's going to have Scottish bagpipes, and it's going to be playing Amazing Grace, even in those very secular cities. But as you know, and as we try to illustrate through this very book this curriculum featured in New York is not one thing, right? It's a whole bunch of things that are happening at the exact same time, sometimes with the same people, sometimes with different people. That's an illustration of our time. So you're right. There's a Venn diagram here where there's the Imagine people, the Amazing Grace people, but somehow there is some sort of overlap among some people in that middle. But yeah.
Yeah, I think and this partly goes back to the whole purpose behind making sense of us. We don't necessarily think critically about our own anthems, our own sort of go-to narratives. And so even sort of looking carefully at the stories that we're located in can be helpful. I mean, as I was working on the story of self, one of the curious things about our modern world, at least in the West and in this sort of particular moment, is that we're responsible to create ourselves in every respect. I mean, we're sort of constantly being told that we need to be who we are. Although delightfully, I was walking down the river yesterday with my daughter, and I walked past a woman who had a T-shirt which said, always be who you are unless you could be a unicorn, in which case be that, which I thought was rather lovely. So we have to be who we are, and on the one hand sort of create that, ex nihilo, like figure out a distinctive, unique
no help from any authorities. Yeah,
that defies sort of authority. And on the other hand, we're discovering who we are by looking inside and seeing what we find there.
And everyone else needs to love you, though, too. Everybody else needs to affirm, and you need to be able to fit in some ways. You need to be unique, but also fit in and be accepted.
Yeah, and I know this is something I've said on this podcast many times, and I'll say it many times again. I think one of the most offensive things about Christianity is that the Bible says, and Jesus says, if we look inside our hearts, what we're going to find there is not true and good and beautiful. We're going to find a whole cesspit of sin. Not that there's nothing good, but that there's enough sort of mixed in there that we would not want anybody else to be able to see our thoughts. And in fact, if anybody could see our thoughts, we would, like, all our relationships would be ruined. I think it's fair. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I think it's fair to say, if you and I were projecting our thoughts on some sort of screen above our heads all the time, we would not be able to continue in a relationship, even with the people we most love. I mean, never mind those we feel we have sort of more consistently negative feelings toward. And at the same time, the one person who does see our thoughts and know the very worst of us is also the one person who died for love of us. That there's this sort of profoundly liberating truth at the heart of Christianity, that we're not invited to pretend or smarten ourselves up or kind of keep a holy exterior going, but instead we're invited into the arms of the one person who knew the very worst of us and decided it was worth him dying for us. So yeah, there's a radically different understanding of self.
Yeah, you see throughout the other episodes as well, the other chapters in this curriculum, a similar dynamic where Christianity is seen as offensive or as other or as past. And yet when you actually critically engage with the alternatives at any level, you see how shallow they are, about how they do not they don't deliver on their promises. So I think about, going back to what you were saying earlier, Rebecca, I think about Glenn Scrivener's on Progress. Again, love it. United Nations, everything. You have the statue there of the swords into plowshares. And you think, of course, oh, that's biblical. And what a beautiful marrying of the biblical vision of the new heavens and the new earth, where we will have peace, there'll be an end of war, combined then with the hope after the Second World War, the United Nations represented. But then, as Glenn points out, that I'd not even considered before, look at the actual statue. It's a hammer and it's a sickle. And this statue was a gift from the Soviet Union. And so you have this promise of it's going to deliver utopia. It's going to deliver, in John Lennon's song, a world without possessions any longer. And how wonderful does that sound, where it sounds like the new heavens and the new earth. And of course, that's exactly where it's borrowed from. And yet, what is the gap between what is promised and what's delivered is impossibly wide. Not only logically, when you start to think it through, it doesn't work, but just historically, it's verified. Maybe they would have had that delusion in the immediate post-war world, but they couldn't have that delusion now, if you've seen how that goes. And so that goes back to what you were saying earlier as well about Christianity simultaneously kind of comes at us as if the gospel is this really offensive thing of like, wait a minute, I'm a sinner. The problem is me, not the solution inside of me. And yet when you see it reflected from the alternative to say, oh, wait a minute, actually, that story is not good at all. It's impossible. And then the story of Christianity is liberating. Wait a minute, to be known completely, which I know I can't trust anybody else to know me. I mean, if I put every thought I had on social media, I would immediately be destroyed.
Right.
Okay,
and rightly so. Right?
And rightly so, exactly. You'd be canceled immediately, and we'd all say good. But then also to be loved. That's how wonderful that is. By contrast, how hopeful, how beautiful, how liberating. If we can help grab people's attention just a little bit to go back and say, don't you want to be known and loved? We know you want to be known and loved, but can you possibly be known and loved under these conditions here? Just of humanity, let alone modernity. No, you can't. So the only way to have that is through Christ. So that's just a consistent pattern, but I just thought you did a great job of it through the one on self. But I mean, Rachel does a great job of hers as well on justice. I know this is one that you talk about a lot. You talk about it in Secular Creed and elsewhere, but I don't know if you had any further thoughts. So how do you see that justice story playing out?
One of my thoughts is I love how part of Rachel Gilson's video in Making Sense of Us is recorded on a New York subway. And I can only imagine what the people sitting around thought was going on.
I don't know. It's the New York subway. Crazy stuff's always happening there.
That's
so
true,
maybe less crazy than normal.
It's almost worth getting the video series just to sort of look at that and be like, what were they like? What were people thinking? Just sort of standing there and just with this cameraman in her face, like talking about
it's
Jesus
a very
and justice.
beautiful scene, and it works perfectly well with her primary location of Grand Central Station. As well.
Yeah, I mean, so at the risk of stealing Rachel's thunder, or I suppose we just kind of share the thunder
a little
back
bit,
and forth.
A little bit, yeah.
One of the fascinating things about the 21st century West is that we, on the one hand, depend on Christian ethics when it comes to justice, and on the other hand, repudiate it. So we take it as a self-evident truth that all human beings are created equal, and that plays out in all sorts of dimensions. That we think men and women are equal. We think people of different ages are equal. We think people of different racial backgrounds are equal. We think of people who are whether rich or poor, able-bodied or struggling with disabilities. Like we deeply believe that, and if there is no God, and in particular if Christianity isn't true, we actually don't have a basis for that at all. And if we listen to some of our leading kind of secular thinkers, I find Yuval Noah Harari so interesting on this, sort of an Israeli historian and philosopher who's coming from a non-belief in God perspective. And he will say things like Homo sapiens have no natural rights, just like chimpanzees, hyenas, and spiders have no natural rights. He says the scientific study of Homo sapiens has embarrassingly little to do with universal human rights and equality. And that's true. Like if the only account we have of what human beings are is a scientific account, and I think from a Christian perspective, it's not that we sort of need to sort of throw out all scientific accounts, but if that's all that we have, if the only true things that can be said of you and me are the ones that can be said, or analyzed by the tools of science, we have absolutely no basis for our deep belief in equality and justice. And if we think about the realm of sexual ethics, when I quite often sort of speak and write about, because it's so front and center in people's minds when they think about the offensiveness of Christianity, even the only claim of sexual ethics on which basically everybody in the West agrees, which is that rape is wrong, that actually came from Christianity. And when you take Christianity away, you don't have a basis for it. If we are nothing more than mammals, I mean, look at the natural world and you'll see many a male mammal raping a female mammal.
It's just power and strength.
In our sort of terms. Right.
Power and strength all the way down.
So what's our problem with that? Well, our problem is a Christian understanding of human equality and of individual, ironically, sort of individual freedom before God, and the idea that every human being profoundly matters, and so no human being can be kind of used by another. There are all sorts of layers that we find Christianity sort of has given us to this deep belief we rightly have that rape is wrong. But if we try to take Christianity out, rip Jesus out of the foundations, the house just falls down.
Yeah. Do you think, Rebecca, when you're looking at Gen Z, that there's more awareness among that generation of that problem, that disconnect, than in previous generations? I mean, you do a lot of work, you do a lot of evangelism, you get to speak a lot at different levels with that generation. And this curriculum is primarily designed for that group, especially kind of 18 to 29 range. Do you have more hope for that generation putting those pieces together, or is it more continuation of the problem?
I think actually both. I think part of the hope that I have for young men and women today is that they are seemingly towards the end of the playing out of the kind of secular tape, if that's the right metaphor. And when I say secular, it's not even really secular, because especially Gen Z women are desperately spiritually hungry and kind of grasping at whatever spirituality they can get their hands on, whether it's crystals or ayahuasca ceremonies or, meditation or witchcraft. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's not that we've sort of culturally abandoned Christianity for something more intellectually coherent, like for sure not. But I think the extent to which Gen Z women have been hurt and lied to is the terms I'd want to put it in, means that a number of women in that category are sort of waking up to the fact that, okay, some of what I've been told is just not true, and some of what's been passed off as empowerment and liberation is in fact the most horrifying misogyny. So I think there's hope at the end of a road that has led to hopelessness for young women in the West, and we're seeing that more and more with authors who are writing about these questions, starting as people who would not identify as Christians and sort of ending up going to church and saying that they trust in Jesus. So I think I see a hopefulness there, not because those narratives are in decline so much as because they've been shouted so loudly, and have more and more people are finding out that they're being lied to.
Yeah. Oh, I see much. I see much of the same. I answer the both and as well, because on the one hand, it's so deeply ingrained and the Christian memory is increasingly distant that this is the only world that they know, that I search within to find myself, that happiness comes from acquiring more things, and the real problem is that people don't give me those things that I know that I deserve, or that happiness comes in freedom from constraints, and as opposed to freedom to be able to pursue a certain kind of goal. Progress will become when there is no more religion. I mean, in one sense, that stuff is so much more deeply ingrained, yet at the same time, you're not always having to argue in defense of Christianity all the time, because you don't have as many people who are directly reacting against it. They're not always been directly hurt by the church, or just been bored of church. You just have fewer people who have that direct experience themselves. And so in some ways that ignorance is a little bit easier to work with, because you're able to introduce certain concepts. And nevertheless, it's still pretty effective in most evangelistic conversations I have to just say something like, tell me about the God you think that I believe in. And of course, that's not the God that I believe in, which becomes an opportunity to share about the one who truly gives life and the one who reveals himself to us in his word. But yeah, that's what I was just wondering. I wish there were an easy narrative to say, oh, good, here's the new thing, here's the new angle, here's the new opportunity. It's like, well, I don't think there's going to be a one bullet that pierces through everything.
Right, and actually, in some ways, I think it's a relief. We don't need anything new. What we need is the basic things that Christians have been doing for 2,000 years, not least practicing hospitality. I think there is a desperate loneliness in our modern world, as people are becoming more and more isolated for a whole host of reasons. And one of the beautiful things that we can do if we are followers of Jesus is build thick, rich community and invite other people into it and say, actually, you don't need to be alone. And the basis on which you can be loved is not the basis of a sexual relationship or of achievement or of, how great you look or how many followers you have or whatever. But we're building a community here where people are accepted and loved on the basis of Jesus. That he has welcomed us, and so it's our business to welcome one another. There's this extraordinary verse in Paul's letter to the Romans where he says, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you to the glory of God. And I sort of stubbed my toe on this verse a few years ago, because Romans is so full of amazing, extraordinary, kind of breathtaking verses that it's easy to miss a verse like that in amidst all the other extraordinary things that Paul is saying. But when you think about it, what does it mean to welcome one another as Christ has welcomed us? Well, he took on human flesh and died on a Roman cross for love of us. I mean, that's one heck of a welcome. So the tiny echo, the sort of insufficient, puny efforts at welcome that we can participate in if we're followers of Jesus are vanishingly small in comparison to Jesus' welcome, but actually really precious, I think, in this modern world. Collin, for those who would love to get a hold of this this curriculum, tell them where they can get it and how it can best be used.
Yeah. Well, just go to makingsenseofus.com. That's the easiest way to do it, just makingsenseofus.com. And you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it in bulk from the Gospel Coalition's store. As soon as you buy the book, then you get access via a QR code to be able to watch all the videos. We wanted to produce a product that would both evangelize and edify. That was a big part of Tim Keller's ministry. And realistically, it's a big part of apologetics. We always think about how we're arguing with non-Christians or sometimes against non-Christians, but the reality is, and Rebecca, I know you've seen this all over your ministry. It's been such a huge blessing to so many different people, but especially in this kind of post-Christendom situation, most of the questions that you're addressing from non-Christians are questions that Christians also have, especially younger Christians as they're just thinking through this kind of stuff. So the hope is that if you want to do this in an evangelistic type setting, almost like an alpha course where you're going through this together, some Christians, some non-Christians, it should work well for you to be able to do that. If you're in a church setting or in a Bible study setting for a campus ministry or something like that, you want to do this to be able to help build up and disciple your members, you should be able to do that as well. And I'm hopeful that it's going to translate into a lot of different settings across the West, from Australia to the UK to Canada to the United States to other parts of Europe and other in major cities, from Southeast Asia to South America to Africa and places like that, because so many of these values are shared through media in these different locations. And so, so that's how I'm hoping people will be using it. I know people, as we're recording this, we're not too far away after Easter, and a lot of people have already planned this to be able to be shared with groups after Easter. That's obviously a good way that people have used it. But we're really encouraged by the response so far, and eager to see more stories of how God uses it. Like you said, Rebecca, it's comforting to know there's not one way to do things. So we're not claiming this is going to be a substitute, but this is the perfect for other biblical methods of preaching and hospitality and all that kind of stuff. But it works really well alongside those kinds of things. It's a good hospitable thing to be able to do with somebody. And I know from having watched the videos, one advantage about this, last thing I'll say just about the usage of it. So often in evangelistic curriculum, it's always the non-Christian who's on the other foot, and they always have to sort of answer and respond to the Christian question. This one's different because instead of you sitting across a table, imagine that just visually sitting across a table and you're arguing, it's like you're both shoulder to shoulder and you're looking at something together. You're looking at a cultural narrative that both of you have found to be very powerful because you both live in the same culture. And then you're considering it on its own merits. And only then do you begin to have the conversation, now what does Christianity say about this? So hoping even just that visual posture is helpful to people to think about how this resource could be used. And again, encouraged by what the response has been so far and eager to see where it goes from here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Collin. For those who are used to listening to me once a week and won't be for the next several weeks because I'm taking a little summer break. This is a 7-week course, so you could
perfect.
You could grab a coffee, you could indulge in one video each week. One of them will be mine, others will be by dear friends like Rachel Gilson and Glenn Scrivener and Sam Chen. This could be just a really helpful way for you to explore your own thinking, maybe invite a friend or a group of friends to do it alongside you. Collin, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for all your support and help over the years. You guys have been listening to the Confronting Christianity podcast. You can follow us on X or Instagram. You can leave a review on iTunes. You can subscribe for a weekly newsletter, which will start up again in the fall. But between now and the next time I speak into your AirPods, maybe not until September, maybe spend some time reflecting on what stories are you telling yourself about yourself How are you making sense of your own life? And could it be that Jesus could make more sense of your life than you do?